December 5, 1944. The Navy Department deeply regrets to inform you that your son, Ensign Hans Lundby Jensen, was killed in an airplane accident on 27 November 1944 while in the service of his country. The department extends to you its sincerest sympathy in your great loss.
Ensign Jensen's mother and stepfather received the tragic news of their son Junior's death by telegram just weeks after he displayed extraordinary heroism in the historic Battle of Leyte Gulf. Considered one of World War II's most decisive air and sea battles and the largest naval battle in history, this pivotal campaign crippled the Japanese combined fleet in the Pacific, permitting the U.S. invasion of the Philippines and reinforcing the Allies' control of the region. In the wake of the battle, Ensign Jensen was recognized by the U.S. Navy Department as the first American pilot to spot the Japanese Central Force at Leyte Gulf. Between 0600 and 0700 on the morning of 25 October 1944, American escort carriers about 50 miles east of the island of Samar in the Philippines were electrified to hear a 20-year-old torpedo bomber pilot on anti-submarine patrol report having sighted a powerful force of Japanese battleships, cruisers, and destroyers steaming toward them through the San Bernardino Strait. But this was not where the Japanese were supposed to be at all, and the young pilot's report was initially challenged. Ensign Jensen, aware of imminent danger, desperately tried to convince the American escorts that he was indeed seeing enemy Japanese warships, later identified as Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita's Setter Force. Watching helplessly as the enemy closed in, Ensign Jensen unhesitatingly risked his life to strike fiercely, bravely launching a lone, unsupported attack in his TBM Avenger torpedo bomber on the nearest Japanese cruiser with the only weapons he had, 3 depth bombs. Under heavy fire, Jensen dropped his bombs on a Mogami-class cruiser.
Jens took us back into cloud cover and broke radio silence to notify the ships of what we'd discovered. He then decided to make a run on one of the Japanese ships, although we only had depth charges to release. Down we went on our run and dropped it on one of the bigger ships. As we passed over it, I could see their crewmen running around the deck in panic, with our plane being shot at by the AA gunners and me strafing them with the .30 caliber, probably also in panic, and Ken Soder firing his .50 caliber ball turret gun. Soon we were back in cloud cover, having escaped unhurt by their firepower. By this time, Japanese shells were dropping around our group of ships, so we were not allowed to land on the Kadashan Bay or any carrier. We were told to find a newly made runway on shore.
The perseverance and grit that Ensign Jensen displayed at Leyte Gulf became evident early in Junior's young life. He was known to be determined and patient, and when he set a goal, he never deviated. Jensen was born October 5, 1924, in Blackfoot, Idaho, to Hans Lundby Jensen Sr. and Bonita Armstrong. His father was a Danish immigrant, a firefighter by trade, who died in a sugar factory accident just 3 weeks after his son's birth. Hans was the only child of Hans Sr. and Bonnie, and when Junior was 4 years old, his mother married David Dowling. Hans spent the remainder of his childhood in Salt Lake City and Sandy, Utah. Before joining the Navy, he graduated from Jordan High School in Sandy, Utah, and was known by many nicknames, including Junior, Jens, and Dutch. After graduating a year early, Hans was determined to serve his country. Commissioned as a member of Navy Composite Squadron 20, Ensign Jensen achieved this ambition, going into combat by the time he was barely 20, still not old enough to buy a drink in Utah. 6 days before he died, the young hero reached out to his parents in a letter to share an account of his combat experience. The irony of his death during a training flight just a few weeks later is significant, given the harrowing experience he survived at Leyte Gulf.
Dear folks, I can now tell you more about our recent operations. We were part of the fleet covering the landings on Leyte and Samar Islands, and took a great part in the rout of the Japanese fleet on October 24th and 25th. On the 24th, we were operating off the east coast of Samar, in the vicinity of the strait which gives entrance to Leyte Gulf. At dawn on the 25th, we launched our regular flights, and and it was myself, a few minutes later, that sighted and sent the word that the enemy was present. It didn't take long for the whole ship to find out that here, at last, was the real thing. In just a few minutes, we learned that they were closing in on us. There wasn't much we could do except make ourselves scarce as expeditiously as possible. Meanwhile, we had launched quite a few aircraft armed to the teeth with orders to attack. The enemy started firing at us. Before long, our planes made their runs. They must have been pretty effective, because quite suddenly the enemy began to retire to the northwest. We then became the pursuer, and the rest of the day we kept our planes working on the Japanese. We did a wonderful job. And don't worry if you don't hear from me for a while. Love, Dutch.
Dutch's beloved folks kept their son's legacy alive and immortalized his story for generations. David Wright, a history professor at the University of Calgary, is Ensign Jensen's nephew.
For my brothers and cousins and me, Junior was an inescapable part of growing up. My mother and her sister Myrna Lee and her brother Lynn kept his memory alive in our hearts and minds. To him, a lad barely 20 who fought back his fears and strove alone against the arrayed forces of tyranny and oppression in the face of overwhelming odds. To him who left a legacy of tremendous admiration and fond memories among his crewmen and shipmates. To him I say, with the affection of a nephew, the awe of a historian, and the gratitude of an American. Well done, sir.
For his heroic actions during the battle at Leyte Gulf, Ensign Jensen was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross and Air Medal. Ensign Hans Lundby Jensen was originally buried on the grounds of St. John's by the Sea Lorengau Memorial Chapel on Manus Island. Although his family received his personal effects at the end of the war, several years passed before Ensign Jensen's gravesite was identified and his remains were repatriated. His final burial services were held at the Sandy City Cemetery in Utah at dusk on July 7, 1948. Stout-hearted and indomitable, Ensign Jensen fought a gallant battle in the face of overwhelming odds, and his superb airmanship, relentlessly aggressive tactics, and great personal valor throughout the critical emergency upheld the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service.